So welcome to the Global Network webinars. My name is Alexander Loschke, and I will be moderating this webinar today together with my colleague Yusi Sang. We're extremely happy to have with us today Giorgia Lupi from the New York design studio Pentagram, who will give her illustrated talk, Speak Data. Today, data is everywhere. But what does data really mean, and how can we extract real value from it in our daily lives? In her talk, Giorgia will discuss our new data reality and data humanism, which is Giorgia's unique philosophy for understanding and working with data. Surveying her diverse work over the last decade, Giorgia will introduce her distinctive approach to data visualization by looking at the human side of data, and we will have a look into the far-reaching applications of her work and in data and design, from corporate to institutional to personal. Let me now tell you a bit more about our speaker. Giorgia is an information designer and partner at the design studio Pentagram. She has a master's degree in architecture and a PhD in design from the Politecnico di Milano in Italy. In 2011, she co-founded Accurate, an internationally acclaimed data-driven design firm with offices in Milan and New York. Giorgia is the co-author of the books Dear Data and Observe, Collect, Draw. She's a TED speaker, Director's Fellow of the MIT Media Lab, member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on New Metrics, and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Art. Her work is part of the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art and of the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, both here in New York. Before we start, let me quickly mention just a couple of practical things, like always. We will first hear the presentation and will then have a Q&A session at the end. Please feel free to write comments and questions into the meeting chat at any time. And during the Q&A, please ask the question yourself, or if you wish, we can also ask the question for you. Just let us know. As always, this Global Network webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Global Network of Data Officers and Statisticians at yammer.com/unstats. We invite you to continue the discussions on the Global Network after the webinar. And so now over to you, Giorgia. Welcome again to our Global Network webinars. The floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for having me. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know that we're connected from different parts of the world. Thank you for joining today. So I'm going to share my screen because, as Alexander was mentioning, my presentation is full of images and videos. And as we tried with Teams for the sake of bandwidth, I'm going to just turn my video off for the moment that I'm sharing the screen, and then you'll see me back in the end. All right, Alexander, just confirm that you're seeing my presentation full screen?
Yes, that looks good. All right. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I titled my talk Speak Data, and I'll explain why as we go. But just a bit of a context. I define myself as an information designer, and that means that every day with my team, I shape and design different ways that my clients and their clients access different kind of information, and particularly in my case, data. So data that can be qualitative and quantitative, big and small, data that organizations already have, or actually most of the time crafted by myself and my teams in collaboration with our clients, and data that we then represent visually, so translating numbers into images, as you can see from these previews, through data visualization and through building interactive experiences with this visualization. I'm a partner of Pentagram, which is an independent design agency that is made of 24 partners. This is us before the pandemic, and we're split between our offices in New York, where I work from, London, Berlin, and Austin. And Pentagram structure is pretty unique. We all, as partners, are practicing designers. And so we really serve as the primary contact for every client. And each of us have really our own team and clients. And this is because we're really passionate about what we do. So we're designer at heart. And this is what Pentagram does. This is what we do. Pentagram is almost 50 years old, and my partners, way before I joined, have contributed in shaping our collective visual culture for almost the past 50 years through graphic and identity, also product and packaging, editorial design and book design, websites and digital experiences. I'm sure that you recognize some of these logos and icons that we see every day and we use every day. And what I introduce with my team is data as one of the languages that we could use to communicate across experiences and across platforms. But let's pause for a second and start with the definition. So what is data? So in this audience, I assume that some of you, or maybe you all, work with data, and you definitely, most of you maybe know how to make sense of data. But let's talk about the audiences that our data are directed towards most of the time. So for many people, data feels not so connected with real life, and it might even have a vague and nebulous meaning, often associated with numbers and technologies and algorithms only, and often seen as scary and complicated, cold and inhuman. But there's another approach to what we so-called call data that has always interested me more when it comes to make people relate to indicators and numbers. That is always to remember and remind people that data is an abstracted representation of our reality, and therefore a lens and a filter that we can use to see our world through, any aspect of our world, especially our human nature and our society, one subject at a time. And then for us communicators, design has the power to be an incredible translator of these data into visuals and experiences that people can truly understand and relate. And I will make you a few quick examples to give you an idea of the variety of projects where data can be used this way before digging into the core of what I want to do today. So for example, and this is all from personal experience and projects that I've done, we span from working with newspapers and magazines. This is a project, a 10-year ago project, a very early collaboration with the Sunday supplement of Corriere della Sera, which is the main Italian newspaper, where from 2012 to 2014, we designed more than 40 data analysis and visualizations, but probably not the visualizations you would expect on a national newspaper, as you can see from these previews. So every way we look for data on a main topic, we started with a question, we started with a topic we wanted to investigate, combining and overlaying different information on cultural and social phenomena with many layers of context. And then we visualized with a unique language crafted and created specifically for the data stories that we found, with a legend for people to understand how to interpret it. And the column that started in 2012 is still going on. And the power of that is to make people engage in discovering data through a visualization and really trying to start and combine quantities and sizes through languages that might be a bit more inspiring as an entry point for rich stories than probably the usual charts that we are used to see as data. To actually creating physical installations with data, again, having people start to understand that data can really be used to tell every kind of story. This is the recent Starbucks Research Roastery that opened in Milan a couple of years ago. And we designed a data visualization carved and etched in this big brass wall that you see. So this is the just a flat version of it. The wall is the one that you saw here to your left, using different carving techniques, perforation and lightning to represent different data points, depicting the timeline of the history of the brand, the coffee making process, and the places in the world that have been fundamental for Starbucks history. So once more, a kind of data visualization that serves as a storytelling material. And in this case, a wall that can also be experienced through an augmented reality mobile app that was already kind of like part of the Starbucks experience, that brings this data to life, where we designed this module that adds a digital layer that interacts directly with the physical space of the wall. So again, like getting data out of the usual places we see data into, when in this case, the wall is starting to a living artwork with access to so many data-driven extra content. To give you an idea of the span of things that you can do, if you think about data this way as a way to abstract our reality, to create experiences such as an activation event with data. This was for TED 2017, where we created what we called data portraits of all the people that were at the main conference in Vancouver. So images that were based on people's answers to a series of questions that you can see to the right about their work-related stress, the way they get their best idea, or how much they freak out when the unread inbox number piles up. Answers translated into a unique data-driven image that people at TED were wearing on top of their badges, and they would use to identify similarities and differences with other people at a glance, really like an excuse to introduce themselves at the conference to strangers, an icebreaker to start a conversation that was much more meaningful than saying, hello, I'm Giorgia, I'm an information designer, what do you do? And this is the last example before getting to the core of, speak data, as the title says. So to more meta type of projects, such as this work we've done for IBM, where in 2017, we designed instead a system of guidelines for all their data product, their data visualization. So first of all, guidelines on how to work with data visualization effectively on a daily basis. So the do's and don'ts, how to pick colors for accessibility, how to pick a different type of chart depending on what you want to show. Is it a comparison over time? Is it a comparison of quantities? But then also, most importantly for them, guidelines that could translate the great design heritage that IBM has built over the years into how they work with data, as you can see from these charts. So guidelines that would make their chart look and feel like IBM, taking a clear visual inspiration from the materials of IBM's from the past, and even venturing into looking at physical objects, part of the IBM tradition, exploring how the textures of numbered rows and columns on the IBM punch cards can look like single elements that can be interacted with on a data visualization. But after this detour, let's get back to data. I believe that this is a particularly interesting moment in time to advocate for data to become a language that everybody should learn how to speak and use. Well, think about this. In the past 13, at this point, I think 15 months, we passed from a population where only a few of us cared about data to a population where every single person out there relied on data and charts every day to decide how to act in the pandemic, where maps and diagrams have become the general population's vitamins, daily vitamins. I don't even have to tell you, and where terms like flattening the curve are almost colloquial. So the past year, we all know, has been a revolution for how much people know the data are present in everybody's lives. And so there's never been a better moment in time to advocate for everyone out there, once more, not necessarily all in this audience, to become data fluent. But not only to learn how to read the charts, but to really fully understand the human aspect and the human possibilities of what we, again, so coldly call data. And I believe that we as designers, as communicators, could really make a difference here. Again, because data are our actions, our activities, our emotions, they are our lives, and they're as much about the numbers as they are about the context. They are as much as what is in the data set as they are about the way that they've been collected, the way that have been interpreted. So, and they're as much about the facts as they are about story. And this is how I want to talk about data today. And so in the remaining time of this presentation, I'll show you some experiences more in detail, really also getting at the end of the presentation in the back, the background, the back scenes of how we usually build these projects to hopefully inspire you and make you eager to teach or learn even more this language. So I will start with a very radical experiment where no technology was involved. It was a self-initiated project, so no clients here, that after years of working pretty much only digitally or on digital experiences, such as what you've seen before, or, kind of like, let's say, with digital tools and with quote unquote bigger data sets. So this project really reconnected me to the very nature of data. It's called Dear Data, and it's a collaboration with a designer based in London named Stephanie Pazovic. So Stephanie and I met only twice in our lives when we decided to run this very strange experiment around one main question. Is it possible to get to know another human being through data only? So for Dear Data, every week and for 1 year, we used our personal data to get to know each other. personal data that we collected around weekly shared very mundane topics, from our thoughts and ideas to our most intimate feelings, from our belongings to our apologies and laughters. So 52 excuses in form of data in a way to investigate and reveal particular aspects of ourselves and about our day. And then personal data that we would manually hand drawn on a postcard-sized sheet of paper that every week was sent from London to New York, where I live, and from New York to London, when Stephanie leaves, for 1 year. Where the front was always the data drawing with no explanation at all, and the back contained, of course, the address of the other person and the legend. So how to read our drawing, how to interpret what happened in our week, like if we opened a letter. And Stephanie and I collected all of our data manually to force us to focus on the nuances that computers and devices cannot gather, or at least not yet, using data to actively explore what we were curious about, our minds, and not only our activities, and getting insights on really what mattered the most to us. For example, week number 3, we tracked the thank yous that we said and we received. So who they were for and from, what they were about, if it was really meant or it was more of like a courtesy thank you. And you really start seeing how much context we put into these quantifications in a way. And in this example, personally, by looking at my week through the lens of this particular layer, I realized that I thanked mostly the people that I didn't know very well, but I kind of didn't thank enough the people who were close to me. So it was also an act of self-reflection to quote unquote data. And so we started to look at our days through data, such as in this case where I mapped my complaints, borrowing a very literal visual inspiration from the music notation system to show the repetitiveness of my complaints over time. But again, not only quantifying the numbers of time I would complain, but instead adding context and details about why, what was happening, what was the situation and the feeling, in a way realizing week after week how to put ourselves in these numbers, and realizing the importance of adding context and qualitative aspect to make this data truly representative of ourselves. So over 52 weeks, we mapped our envies and what the feeling triggered in us, our desires and what they told about us, emotions and decisions, apologies, and many more, creating in a way intimate portraits of ourselves to share with the other person through this invisible layer of data. In this case, data that are much more interesting, I think, than what we usually associate with personal data collections, such as number of steps, expenses patterns, or calories intake. I'm sure all of you have on your phone or your Apple Watch or any device some of these metrics to track about yourself. But there's much more that we can explore. This is what is given, but what are we really curious about? I think this is really the way that we should always access and explore data. And I think this is true for personal data and beyond, small and big data, for all kind of data. So Dear Data also became a book that is at its 3rd edition, and the original collection of postcards that Alexander was mentioning have found the most exciting home as they have been acquired as part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art, which has been quite nice. But what excited us and me even more is that Dear Data has been so well received from the public outside the data community. We've really seen thousands of postcards made by people, not even designers or artists, not data scientists or statisticians, that learned about the project and wanted to experiment on themselves. And even teachers of any grade are using this format to teach their students the world of data, but also to teach their students how to, really deal with their emotions and each other's, starting from human observations and human questions as opposed to what's already there in form of data. All right, so wrapping up Dear Data, you've seen that we can turn even the smallest details of our lives into data that we can look at to see things from a different perspective. But besides personal data, we can really do this anywhere and everywhere. I'm always often asked, where do you find data? And lately, I'm replying more and more that I often design my data sets. And you'll see what I mean with this other example. So in 2017, so a few years ago, I had the great honor to collaborate with Paola Antonelli. She's the senior curator for design architecture at the Museum of Modern Art, and with her team on a piece that closed the show Items, Is Fashion Modern? That if somebody was in New York in the audience, you might have seen if you went at MoMA. So the show was fantastic. It presented 111 111 items of clothing and accessories that Paula and her team selectively curated and decided to include because they together as an ecosystem, but individually, have had a strong impact and influence on our culture. And if you only read the list of the elements, from the bikini to the burkini, the Levi's 501, the bandana, the baseball cap, the Doc Martens, the Patagonia fleece jacket, the balaclava. And I have had the incredible opportunity to create a site-specific, hand-drawn, after the data, visualization that was really big on the sixth floor lobby that guided visitors as soon as they exited the show to explore the feature of the items, both individually and as part of a bigger ecosystem. But what's interesting here, and the reason I'm bringing this project up, is that I didn't have any data. I only had the list of the 111 objects, in and on itself really powerful, and the background research, so really just a lot of paper, that was conducted by the curatorial team on each of them. And so I put on the glasses of the data collector in a way, and I delved into these 111 stories in search for bits of qualitative and quantitative information that could help me answer a few main questions to really understand and reveal why was each one of the items included in the show. And so the questions that I asked to build a data set were, for example, is the item a medium or a message? Meaning, is it iconic because of its technical or aesthetical features, or for what it represents? And then if they're a message, are they want to conform to a movement or to escape? Meaning, has it become a way to blend into a social context or to break free from it? And many more of this kind, crafting a data set from this question, where the data were absolutely not in this form that you see here before this analog process. And then each one of the items, depending on these attributes, became a symbol that I drew on the wall, positioned and visualized according to this set of, again, parameters that together with the curator we highlighted with the timeline to show when they were introduced, and actually some sort of like categorization vertically that follow the flow of the show so people could really relate. And with the legend to the left, that could help everybody start to understanding and digging into each one specifically. And so in this case, the whole point of my exercise was to start from the final manifestation of this process and then work backward, really reconstructing the invisible data set that Paula and her team used, if you will, as an input for their design, even without knowing it, and then making it visible for everyone to see through the lens of data. Something that to me is incredibly valuable. Maybe the people in the exhibition, the people that saw the exhibition, visitors might have had questions about, why this particular one, why this other, what is the combination of the objects together can tell us about how the way the fashion makes us relate to each other and to society. And that exercise was some sort of like really organizational exercise to help visitors find their own way to interpret what Paula and her team put together. So look for the data we don't see. In similar situations, we don't see these invisible layers, first of all, because we often don't observe and collect this more qualitative and human, I would say, type of data, but also because we still don't have the visual languages needed to embed this data. I think as designers, we still have to experiment and explore beyond bar charts and pie charts, which I have nothing against. But I think this is really exciting and promising. And I would also say much needed, especially beyond the more artistic experimentations. So as I was discussing with Alexander's and team, the focus of this talk, today I'm showing intentionally very speculative projects, and so almost borderline artistic projects with data, in the hope that they can inspire us to think about data in a different way, even in the more traditional manifestations of data. And this next project is still somehow artistic, but it tackles, I believe, a very important matter, which is data in the medical field. Yes. So it's a collaboration with a dear friend of mine, Kaki King. She's a great guitar player. So 2 years ago, unfortunately, actually 3 years ago, unfortunately, Kaki's 3-year-old daughter, Cooper, was diagnosed with a condition called ITP, which is an autoimmune disease where her body attacks her platelets and then leads to spontaneous bruises, burst blood vessels called petechia all over her body, and in the most terrifying cases, even internal bleeding. So For 4 months, we collected and combined quantitative data from her daughter's Cooper test and qualitative observations from Kaki, so data from her life, her home level of stress, the main episode that happens, and data that we decided to share through visualization. So we decided to share this very personal journey, not with words, but through this data that I then visualized in a way that you probably wouldn't expect on a medical visualization, because these data are very intimate and very intense and personal. So I asked myself, can the data visualization evoke empathy and activate us also at an emotional level and not only at a cognitive one? So here we start going into the process and how this visualization started. So I structured a fluid timeline to tell the stories of these very hard months for Kaki and her family. Every symbol, every petal here represents a day, and the rhythm is broken every time that Cooper, her daughter, was admitted to the hospital to check her platelet counts, because these were really very telling moments for Kaki and her family. And the burst of red dots represent this value. So you can see a zoom here. And then we have all the data as observed by Kaki herself, like the purple splotches to represent the visible bruises on Cooper's skin and their intensity. So in this visualization, the darker the spots and the more present they are, means that, Kaki observed that that day Cooper's skin was worse. And the pink dots for the petechia, the blood marks on her skin and how spread out they were. Zooming out to make you see the full. Then when Cooper was taking steroids, you'll see these gray shapes affecting the days when Cooper was taking medications. In this other part is where Cooper had some incident that caused her skin to worsen, such as she fell at the park or she was bitten by a mosquito. But again, there was also all that was going on in Kaki's life and in her mind that is a lot part of this experience. So Kaki used to tour a lot before the pandemic, and now she's back touring, but she felt very stressed when she was away from home in this particular period of time. And this is indicated with these black dots on the day she was gone. So context for her to remember. And then in these days, it was her wife that made the observation. So it was kind of like a joint data collection. But in these dark months, there have also been positive moments, such as a fun birthday party for Cooper and her brother, or a great Halloween night that I represented here with these bright yellow spots that in a way cheer up the visual. And finally, Kaki also kept track of her level of hope and her level of fear for the day that she reported on a scale from 1 to 10 for both emotions, and that I visualized through these floating lines where the dark lines are the fears and the orange lines are the hope. And all around, and this is the final artwork, we added Kaki's personal notes for each day. And so you see really that this visual is definitely not a traditional visualization of medical data, but in a way really represent what was going on in the journey of a family, a patient, and their caregivers. What's interesting is also that this visual was used as a musical score by Kaki herself to create a piece of music that she composed directly from the 4 months of the data collection, where the timeline of the song that you're about to hear represent what was happening in their lives, exactly as the visualization. So I will play the song for a little bit, and I would like for you to ask yourself if you can feel something through this data. Just playing a bit of it for the sake of time. So as you can probably see, this is not by any means a scientific representation of data, but I still think it paints a pretty complete and very sensorial pictures of this personal journey. And many people living similar experiences told us that the visualization made them really feel part of Kaki's story in a way that probably a blog post wouldn't have. And I don't want to say that this can lead to any scientific breakthrough in the medical field. This is not the point of my work. But once more, I believe that there's a world of unexplored, small and intimate data that we often don't see if we apply a straightforward definition of what we think data is. And a layer that we also don't see because visualizations often focus on the numbers and not on what the numbers actually represent. What if, for example, we could speak this language to hospital and doctors could speak this language back to us? And then I know many of you are wondering, Cooper is absolutely fine now. She's out of the danger zone. She's healthy and thriving, which is the most important thing. And I'll follow up definitely with a lighter note that perhaps can make us all think about data as a true storytelling material that we could use everywhere. So this next example is one of the most exciting projects I've worked on. It's a fashion collection that I designed for the fashion brand And Other Stories, which is part of the H&M group. Graphic patterns that you'll see printed, embroidered, and sewed are direct representation of, again, I think very huge data points. In fact, I went and looked for data into the achievement of 3 unprecedented women who've been pioneers in previously male-dominated field and also who paved the ground for other women to get started and thrive. So the selection is Ada Lovelace, Rachel Carson, and Mae Jemison, and I'll explain the process for finding data and visualizing data for them. And so, for the 3 of them, I crafted a data set about their major accomplishments. So really what they did, their achievement, and that bright background information on their lives. And as you've seen up until now, in many projects, really the data collection and the data gathering part, when the data are not already there. And so when we're not working with a client that already had a data set, is also an important part of our process. And then data that I used to create the visual patterns that we will see displayed in the collection. So hopefully beautiful patterns that you would want to wear, but that also have a deep meaning and a story that you want to tell behind them. So the first woman, Ada Lovelace, she was born in 1815, and she's considered now to be the first computer programmer in history. And it's fascinating. It was the very first time that someone programmed a machine to do complex math, really, as a matter of fact, originating the discipline of computer science. And for Ada, I analyzed and visualized the structure and mathematical form of the algorithm that she wrote. This is like nerding out on details about the analysis of the algorithm. But, again, talking a little bit about the process. So I already had the data in my mind and the story in my mind. And in parallel, I was looking for visual inspirations in, let's say, pieces of art or images, part of the collection that I pin for myself all the time, that could reflect the nature of the data I was working with. So geometric, repetitive, but with variation in a way. And then I started to sketch different ways in which each one of these 36 steps of the algorithm and the variables could be represented. Started to make these sketches a bit more graphically polished, but then also starting to sketch how to display them on a piece of garment, because obviously, designing for a wallpaper or for a magazine is different than designing for something that you will want to wear. And this is finally the selected options with these vertical elements, one for each of the 36 steps of the algorithm. And you start seeing how then the repetition of this visual form an interesting visual models. Just as you can see here, each of these 36 line of the algorithm is one element with internal dividers representing the variables. And without entering into details, this is the legend that I crafted for myself, where every symbol, color, and divider are represented data point in the algorithm. And so this is the final pattern for Ada with biographical information about the legacy that she created at the bottom. And this pattern lives onto this silhouette that we designed together with the in-house fashion team and Other Stories. And here I started to craft some ideas on how to place it all over, or as a bolder accent, or more creative placement. And these are the final pieces. So you can see that there's definitely a pattern that is displayed on the sweater, complete pattern that is displayed to the sweater to the left, and then that can get displayed in a more creative way in the other two. And I'll share with you also the process for the other women. But what's important here is really that at this point in life, we really can think that data can be used as a material to create graphics with much deeper meaning that people can use as an entry point to discover stories. And I think I'll explain why I'm particularly excited about these type of projects. Well, moving on, yes, as part of the project, there's been a lot of back and forth between testing, designing, samples, and also as part of the shoot for the publicity, a beautiful model was posing as I recreated the legend behind her. So every single communication that came out about this project really had, the deep data meaning behind it. So the process got repeated for the other women. Rachel Carson, she's the first environmental activist. And this book, Silent Spring, that was published in 1962, is the classic that launched the environmental movement. In this case, I went and looked for data in the structure of the content of the book. And again, building, in this case, my visual inspiration around more organic shapes, taking inspiration from nature, because that was really the topic that she cared about, and the topic that is the topic of the book. And these are some first sketches where every element could be a chapter of Rachel's book. And here I started to build this pattern. Every radial element is one of the 17 chapters. The lines are the number of paragraphs and the length of the paragraph. And on the left, there's the aggregation of core structural elements such as punctuation. But then, interestingly, building on top of it, I went to look into the whole book to see what were the nouns and adjectives that she mentioned the most. And you can see a zoom in of like chemical, insects, DDT, life, water, plants, diseases. And building and then I looked into how much they've been mentioned in each chapter. And so that is how I built this final pattern with the 17 chapters and the adjectives and nouns that, she talked about the most, with different background colors. These are the final silhouettes. I'm going a little quicker as you get the point. So placing patterns in different ways on the fabrics, as I did with Ada, getting bolder with some elements. And here we go with the final pieces. So once more, you see that there's definitely an element of connection between all of them, which is the data visualization. But in any case, you can create, different type of silhouettes and ways to place it. This is one of the samples where the pattern were embroidered. And once more, the model wearing them as I was recreating the legend. Finally, Mae Jemison, she was born in 1967 and she's still alive, and she's been the first African-American woman astronaut. And for her, I visualized the orbits of the space shuttle mission that she performed around Earth in 1992. In this case, taking inspiration from circular patterns, as you can see here. So recalling orbits and recalling, a space discovery kind of a theme. Starting to sketch the orbits features, and we finally landed on this version where one circle is one orbit, and we will have 126 of them. And this is the final pattern. So the symbol that you see above represents which day she orbited around Earth in September 1992. And the color shadows represent the time of the day for the orbit. So an homage to her mission and on the color of the sky and Earth as she saw it from above. And then on the background, I represented all the experiments that she performed in these 9 days, from radio transmissions to zero gravity investigation. So very fascinating. And again, elements of the collection, possible placements, shirt, and there they are. Once more, again, a pattern that then gets in a way creatively placed around, with here also playing with background colors inversion. Oh yeah, and there was also this extra puffer for the winter, and the model wearing them. And then finally, for each woman, we also designed a t-shirt where we extracted one element of the pattern only. It was kind of like a bold signature, more of like a publicity type of effort. But most importantly, also when customers bought any of the garments in stores, they got a paper bag that I designed containing the pattern and the legend. So again, how to interpret what's in the texture, which it really always is a very crucial point of my work. And I mean, I'd like to say that I know that probably not everyone is nerding out dissecting the algorithm that Ada built from here, but at least they really know that what they're wearing has a deep meaning. And many people started to just tell us how much it's really great to have this dress that they like that they can use to tell stories. And really up to these days, and the collection was launched 2 years ago, we still receive messages of like, oh, it's my favorite thing is going out with this sweater, and like really start telling this story and start, starting a conversation in a way about it. And what excites me about these projects, it's that for me, it's another step further to demystify data in a way. For example, I see this specific type of project as one of the possible evolutions to the graphic T-shirt with a written message. Every garment that has a message that we want to carry around. In this case, the fabric itself is the message, where every feature of a garment possibly could be connected to information and messages that we're proud and happy to carry around us. But also as a designer that works with data and advocating that everybody should speak data, the reason I'm particularly interested in these less conventional, but perhaps again more popular projects, it is their potential to reach a far wider audience that might start thinking about data in a different way. And that they might also start caring about certain data and therefore certain topics more. This is the last project I'm going to share, so they will have 15 minutes or 10 minutes or something for questions. It's the last example that I'm sharing. And recently we worked around the topic of climate change in the hope that presenting data in an engaging and surprising way could help people be more aware and possibly even change their behavior. It's an experimental work with release for Google Arts and Culture. It is an alarming, if you will, interactive experience about airborne microplastics. And the experiment was called Plastic in the Air. So, do we all know what happens to plastic items when we dispose of them? They actually degrade into smaller and smaller pieces called microplastic, which then end up within the air we breathe, really floating all around us, even if we cannot see it. And so when you enter the website, you're shown a sea of multicolored shape, like floating across the screen. And it is a kind of like a speculative window onto a data-driven approximation of party plasticals that exist all around us. And so as you interact, you can drop, in a way, identifiable objects to pollute the sky. And then you see the item breaking down into the air, starting to contribute to the sky becoming more and more dense and filled with these particles, where the shapes and colors are the depiction of the different sizes and characteristic of the microplastic elements that we drop. So you can zoom in and zoom out and select each particle, kind of like revealing their chemical composition, so learning about them, and also revealing what household item they might have come from. But you can also toggle between seeing and not seeing the particles. If you choose to, let's say, look away, but by selecting don't see, you see the plastic in their more familiar form, sometimes obvious, sometimes surprising, and you can still inspect what they're made from. And the second stage shows these objects floating through the atmosphere, almost comically suggesting the urgency, but also the absurdity of this type of pollution. So that was by design. The color of the skies changes according to your location, somehow mimicking the passing of time and the different lights from daytime to nighttime. And you can also adjust factors like cities versus rural area to see how the sky pollutes differently, and weather conditions like wind, rain, and snow to see how these affect the dispersal pattern. These are just some different moments that users screenshotted. And of course, you can learn more and read all the studies being made, and especially what you can do to lessen the pollution in the sky. So the design of this experience speaks to the synthetic nature of the material, with this kind of like plastic inspired color palette that is bright and shiny, which is actually the opposite of the dirty pollution that people normally associate with environmental issues. And, we thought that the subject might be scary and daunting, but we wanted to design the website to look beautiful and appealing to users like plastic themselves. We wanted the experience to be engaging, to encourage people to land on the website, spend time with it, and possibly sharing it with their friends, and hopefully to really think about their behavior as they virtually find this depositing activity compelling, for this kind of like funny oxymoron to actually understand the consequences of the plastics that we use every day. The website is up and running. You can go and play with it. You can easily find the link on any Pentagram website. And here we are. This is kind of like a little conclusion. I hope that, today we've seen how data can be and deserves to be a language that all of us can speak fluently, and that we can all use for all sort of experiences and communication purposes when we want to talk about important matters that have facts behind. And also that we have to learn how to look at data and what are the aspects to put emphasis on which I believe are always the human side of data, because this is what makes people care and relate. And over the years, I built my approach and practice around what I call data humanism, which is a renaissance that I see where data can be truly for everybody, but also unique to anyone. We're talking about data, might mean talking about its intimate qualities in conversation that will be shaped around more subjective and imperfect aspects, where data-driven design is replaced by design-driven data, because we will design the ways we will approach data depending on its unique context every time. And where data will be used more in conjunction to the word people than to the word numbers. And finally, and ultimately, when hopefully, instead of using data only to become more efficient and organized, we can also use data to become more human. And finally, data humanism to me means to always design ways to connect numbers to what they really stand for, which are our ideas and unexplored and open questions about ourselves and our society. And then through design, making this new knowledge available for everyone to access and engage with. Yeah, I'm really excited about the possibilities opened up by this way of looking at data in this very moment in time. And I hope you're too. So I guess that's it. Thank you for listening, if you're still there.
Thank you so much, Giorgia. Really a great presentation, and also a presentation of artwork, basically, which represents data and kind of challenges the way that we usually look at data and the visualizations that we as statisticians or data nerds usually create. So it's definitely something different, and also really changing our probably perception and maybe also our way of representing data going forward. So we would now, thanks again for this presentation. And now we would like to open up the floor for questions. So please, if you would like to ask your question personally, use the raise my hand function, and we also
I'm seeing the questions only now because I didn't see them before. So thank you for all the questions and comments.
Alex, I think you are the only one to unmute the audience.
Yes, let me try to do that now. And while I speak, so allow.
Okay. Yeah, I have allowed that.
Okay. And so maybe in the meantime, disable mix for attendees. No. Okay, so the microphone should be available now. So let me maybe start with one question which came in before the presentation today, actually, during the registration process. And Christophe Bonton, if you are there, I think you are there, maybe you would like to ask your question, which came in before our meeting, which was about dashboards and explaining stories. No?
Hi.
Hi. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this very exciting presentation. I'm a data scientist and teaching visualization. Sorry. Most on the opposite side of yours, not doing any art with that. And my question could be on the decoding of your art. It's something that looks really nice, and I really love the approach of the data. But my question is, what is your goal in doing that? Is it to tell a story or to make people think of how to decode the information?
Thank you. That's always a very interesting question that I think opens. I want to start with this premise. So it obviously depends on the goal of the project and on the audience. So the projects that I shared today are projects where pretty much always it was for, let's say entertaining. Let's say that there was not a there was not a visualization that I showed that was meant for immediate decision-making purposes. I always like to make this example on the spectrum of things that you can do. If I would design a dashboard for a pilot to land a plane, well, probably I will just do red and green. I wouldn't ask a pilot to read a legend, right? But at the same time, I think that when you work in cultural context, on when you are using data to try and tell rich and dense stories, and when you know that your audience will have the time and the space, for example, in a mural to engage, I think we can go for visualizations that are a little richer and denser. Obviously, I tend to detail very much what I do because I want to embed as many layers of context, and everything, as you mentioned, can be decoded through a legend. I also think that the value of these can be over time to experiment and push forward and then understand what people get, what people like, and maybe then, potentially over time starting to build one or two visual languages or one or two ways to visualize charts that can become as popular as bar charts and maps and pie charts. Because if you think about it, we were not born and that we knew how to read a map or a timeline. It's something that we learned. And I think as designers right now, with the complexity that are embedded in data, we have to experiment with new visual languages. And this sometimes passes through maybe pushing it farther away and be like, yes, this is complicated. Do you want to engage? So I hope that this answered your question. Really, really, it always depends on the goal. I've designed for way more straightforward reports and publication, but at the same time, I think even when I design for an organization like the UN's or the World Health Organization, or we're working a lot with the Gates Foundation, we always try and embed some sort of layers of narrative and context to make people relate to these indicators that as much as they're global, they need to speak to a individual human and kind of like contextual experience. But thank you, Christoph, for the question. It's really always important, I think, to clarify that.
Thank you so much. So we have a couple of questions coming in. I will pick some which are probably representative of all the questions. There's a question by Samuel Dubre. Samuel, I don't know if you would like to come in. If not, I can read out your question. So let me just maybe read out the question. So could you speak a little bit more about the process and what tools and media you use at the various stages of when you create basically your data representations? And maybe you can say a little bit more about the process and also about what software you use. That was another question that was asked.
For sure. So I think you've seen a bit of the process with the In the Other Story project, where you see the moment where there's a data collection. And, obviously it depends on the cases, because most of the times when I work with clients that already have a data set, well, the data collection is somehow already there, even though there's always a moment that we call data discovery and data research, where together with the client, and every time I work with client, we're like subject matter experts, we go and see if there's a way to enrich this data, to contextualize it, or maybe to start a different data collection. But let's say the data gathering and data collection process is always the first part. And as for tools, I mean, it really depends. Sometimes it's as analog as you've seen, like really like going through a book and making a data set, or like with the items exhibition, really going through a list of subjects and understanding the context and asking myself questions. So really, I think that as opposed to talking about tools, I feel the data collection part is interesting to be explained by asking the questions that you want to get out of these data sets. Then, the data is in form of a spreadsheet that can live into a JSON file, that can live into like a database that is connected through API, or it can give into like a spreadsheet that is a normal spreadsheet. As for what happens after, again, there's a world in which, depending on, is it an interactive experience that like plastic in the air that we're designing? Is it a mural? Is it a design for a magazine? Then, kind of like the process in a way take different roads. But I would say that in general, then there's really like a sketching part that sometimes with the data set are big, and so they can't really sketched out, also goes in parallel to some sort of like data prototyping. And so, asking questions to the data set in prototype ways to visualize, what's in this timeline. I mean, how many of these categories do we have? But I also, like, to me, there's always a moment where I like close the computer and go and sketch with the dimensions of the data in my head, knowing the numbers. Are we talking about 50 entries of 5 millions? And, and sketching for me is just the way that I have to visualize the data in my head. And then, depending again, if we're going to build an interactive experience, well, usually I don't code myself, but I work with designers who can code and developers who use all sort of, not necessarily too, but they write code in JavaScript, or sometimes they can use libraries such as D3, but really actually not very much for us. But some other times it's really very manual crafting. Like, I have my iPad here that I always use. Some of the experiments that you've seen, like bruises or even the End Other Stories projects. I kind of like draw things manually. I draw things manually on my iPad. It's very laborious and it's kind of very long, but it's also a very soothing activities. Some other times when the data are not so big, you can use Adobe Illustrator, and they're like really interesting tools there that can help you like build a timeline from a spreadsheet. Again, some other times you just need to code it from scratch. So I guess that's it.
Thanks so much. There was another question in the chat, which I maybe in the interest of time, I'm just gonna ask it myself. So there was another question about some of your visualizations are actually at first very, very complicated to understand, right? You actually need the legend and the explanation how to read the data visualization. So there was a question: isn't the purpose of the data visualization actually to save us time, to actually make us understand more quickly and easily the data? So that was, I guess,
yeah. I think there's a part of this answer that I gave to Christophe, which is it really depends on the context, but I strongly disagree. I think that data visualization is not a simplification of the world. The world and reality is complex, is nuanced, is full of context. And I think the purpose of data visualization is not to simplify reality, because who am I to completely simplify in a bar chart a rich context? I think the purpose of data visualization is to give access to complexity. And that, again, can be done. There's different layers of simplification, but I don't think that oversimplifying is the solution. I also, like to think that, for example, do we really think that, say, a CEO of a company that asks for a super simplified chart that they can read in a second, do they really make super important decision based on that chart? I don't think so. I think that then they'll go and read the 50-page reports probably. So I guess it really is a spectrum. I really don't think that oversimplifying is the way to go. Definitely there's so much that we can do in probably using standard forms of charts, which I do use as well, like a timeline, for example, or a map, or a way of categorizing data visually, and maybe only enrich the visualization so much. So as opposed to building, again, a completely different artwork that sometimes I do also for artistic purposes, you can start enriching a bar chart with some context. You can start, adding some context, even if you don't necessarily go for an over detailed visualization. But no, I don't think that the purpose is simplifying. Never. I personally don't think that, it depends.
Yeah, thanks so much for this.
Yeah, thank you.
There wasn't, there are quite a good number of questions, and we won't be able to tackle everything, but there's also one question which I found quite interesting by Irina Petrovska Marciano. I hope I'm not butchering the name right now. She's saying basically, so do you ever revisit your old visualizations and think, okay, what should I have done better or differently, maybe, or maybe going back to your earlier works, what do you think about them now, and what would you maybe do differently? Yes.
That's interesting. So first of all, as we finish projects, we always do a post-mortem, which is, what were the initial goals? Where did the process take us? Then I think what's interesting about our work is that, sometimes when the artwork was up at MoMA, for example, I could really go there and sit in the back and see how people interacted, what people talked about. I really was following. I think when you're able to also have the time to see how people interact with your design, what they understand and what don't, that's really telling. And even with the main Italian newspaper, I was still living in Italy back then, and when you would go in a cafe on a Sunday and you could really see people just flipping through the page and then opening your visualization and just like talking about each other. So I think that this is really, really a great moment to have a to have a moment of like, okay, what can I learn? I think sometimes, for example, the thing that I learned the most is that every person has a different entry point on the visualization, and so I can tell you how many different entry points to how to read the items chart I saw, and people tend to talk to each other. And I think that probably what I've learned for that is that might even be encouraged even more. So maybe there's something more explicit that I can say in the legends or in the way that I present my work, that this is actually a non-linear storytelling. And so maybe it's not meant to be read from left to right, from top to down. But yeah, I think it's really important to revisit them and to understand what you could have done differently. Again, sometimes then there's a matter of time, like really time. Sometimes an artwork needs to get delivered in a moment, or like an issue needs to get to print by Thursday night, and there's only so much that you can do. And then you already know that you would have done something different if you had a day more. But thank you. I know we're out of time, so.
Thanks, Giorgia. Yes, so we will maybe gather some more of the questions and maybe just give them to you so you can also have a look what people were wondering about when they were listening basically to your presentation. Thank you again so much for this. And and maybe I can ask everyone just now to unmute themselves. So now is the moment where you can do it safely. And please give Giorgia a big round of applause if you can.
Thank you, everybody. You know where to find me. I'm everywhere, so feel free to follow up with questions. And thanks to Alexander and Yuxi for having me.
Yes, thanks so much for being with us. It's really inspiring. And I mean, we're people, or most of us are people who are working with data and visualizations every single day. But yeah, well, we do the boring stuff. We do the pie chart. We do the line chart. Yeah, but this is really inspiring, and hopefully maybe it will also change the way we actually create our visualizations. Just one final thing before you all go. So we have now reached about 2,100 members on the global network of data officers and statisticians. It's in the framework of this global network where we organize these global network webinars. And so please, we would like to understand your experience so far on the global network, and we are conducting a survey for this. So please fill in the survey. We will share or Yusi has already shared the link in the meeting chat. So please fill in the survey. Thank you so much. It only takes 10 minutes, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.